After all, what matters to Donald Trump? Basically, this is a man of enormous greed who wants to be very rich. So money matters, maximizing the earning power of the presidency matters to him, and his ego matters.
It's been little over a month since Donald Trump took office, and Europe is shifting in its orbit to meet the American president's demands, with high-profile summits in London, Paris and Brussels aimed at solidifying and strengthening European defence in opposition to Russia. Ukraine continues to be pressurised by Trump into signing a deal widely dubbed as a mineral agreement, hanging upon which is all future military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine. US officials are clear this is but a pause, ready to be lifted once Ukraine agrees to their demands. But where is Russia in all this? As we know, the aggressor in this conflict, do they really want peace? Speaking to Sky News earlier, the Russian ambassador to the UK, Andrei Kelin, accused the UK of being at the head of the anti-peace effort.
At the moment, UK is at the head of those who are resisting quick peace. Although who will be the leader here? I hear France would like to be the leader of this movement in Europe. UK also would like to have a leading position. Germany also would like to have a leading position in the efforts of rearmament, in the efforts of political things and all of that. If they will really pass this silly decision of rearmament of Europe, then what they are going to do with these toys after the conflict will be over? They will just sit with projectiles and other ammunition, excessive one. Okay, let's do it. This is none of our business.
Well, to help us make sense of all this, Sir Roderic Lyne joins us, a senior former British diplomat who served as an ambassador to Russia from 2000 to 2004. A warm welcome to Times Radio, Roderic Lyne. Thanks for being with us.
Good evening, Kate.
Look, the Russian ambassador there accuses the UK of being at the head of efforts to stop the peace process. I suppose that could be just labelled as Russian rhetoric. What's he getting at there? Just signalling his discontent wherever it can be aimed first?
He's just playing a tune that's been sent to him down the line from Moscow. I think he probably knows that he's talking nonsense, but that's what he's told to talk. The plain fact is that President Zelensky, having been fairly relentlessly bullied and pressured, has now done everything that's been asked of him. He's going to be meeting American officials in Saudi Arabia shortly. But it's not in the power of Zelensky, it's not in the power of the Ukrainians actually to stop this war. It's only in the power of Putin and the Russians. If the Ukrainians stop fighting tomorrow, they would just get rolled over by the Russians. The Russians started it. The Russians can stop it literally at the click of Putin's fingers. And then we've had President Trump saying that he believes they're ready to do so. When he addressed Congress 2 days ago, he said, "We've had serious discussions with Russia and have received strong signals that they're ready for peace." Well, we wait to see. They have given absolutely no signals, and you didn't hear any from the poor, unfortunate Russian ambassador in London just now, that they are actually looking for peace. Absolutely the opposite at the moment.
So, in your assessment, Russia is really not part of these peace talks at all, despite what they've been saying, despite what Donald Trump has been saying? Or is there any basis, are there any grounds for these statements by Donald Trump that Russia, Vladimir Putin, is ready for peace?
Well, only Donald Trump knows, because we, the rest of the world, are not aware of what evidence leads him to say things like the bit I just said, or to tell President Macron, as he did 2 weeks ago, that he'd asked Putin whether he was ready to accept European peacekeepers. And Trump said that Putin didn't mind, and he'd specifically asked that question. He has no problem with it. Well, we have the Russian foreign minister continuing to say that there is no way that the Russians are going to accept European peacekeepers. President Trump says that Putin has said the opposite. We have not seen any hint of yet a peace plan for Ukraine. We've seen this proposed agreement on mineral resources. That's different. We've had Steve Witkoff, the New York real estate developer friend of Trump's, who's going to be involved in the negotiations, saying that when they go to Saudi Arabia next week, he's going to discuss a framework for peace with President Zelensky, and Zelensky says, fine, I'm looking forward to it. But as of this moment, we have not heard from the Americans that they even have a peace plan, let alone that they've discussed it with the Russians, let alone how it is that Trump is so confident that
Yes.
he can get Putin to agree to peace.
Look, it could be that this is Donald Trump negotiating, and if he says it will happen, it makes it thus, and he's sort of forcing the situation. It could be, fair enough, that he has had discussions with the Kremlin or with Vladimir Putin. I mean, we know that the pair have spoken on the phone, so they've definitely discussed something. Russia's also trying to push its own mineral deal on the United States. There is other brokering going on behind the scenes. We hear reports earlier this week, Roderic Lyne, of the US looking at dropping economic sanctions on Russia, bringing them back into the fold.
Yes, it's clear that that's what they've been discussing. In fact, they admit that. It's not clear they've been discussing a peace plan. They have had meetings between their diplomats to discuss the reopening of full embassy operations. They've had a meeting in Istanbul the other day to discuss the reopening of trade connections. Well, that implies absolutely it will require the lifting of sanctions. You've even had Donald Trump talking about the possibility of bringing Vladimir Putin back into the G7, which I think is pretty well unthinkable. So there is an agenda between the Trump administration and the Putin regime about bringing Putin out of the cold. And of course, Trump has discussed with Putin the idea they might hold as many as 3 summit meetings. This is with a pariah. This is with a man who's an indicted war criminal who has been breaching international law for the past 3 years, actually the past 11 years, since the war in Ukraine started. So we know a fair amount of what they've been discussing, but what they've been discussing basically is Donald Trump shoving a whole series of carrots into the mouth of the donkey Putin, with the donkey Putin not moving forward 1 inch. What we don't know is whether at any point Trump is going to apply any pressure to Putin, because the only person he's been applying pressure to up to now has been Vladimir Zelensky and the Ukrainians.
You, whilst you were the UK ambassador to Russia, Putin would have been in office, wouldn't he, during that period?
Yeah.
Did you ever deal with him? Did you ever get close to him? Can you tell us anything about Vladimir Putin? Has he been on his own journey, since your dealings with the Kremlin, in terms of how he might be dealing with this in the current day? Are we right to call him a dictator? Is there anything credible to him at all? I mean, clearly Donald Trump must think so.
I'm not sure what Donald Trump thinks. I'm not sure that Donald Trump knows very much about Russia. Donald Trump has been reportedly bailed out by the Russians on a number of occasions when he was in deep financial trouble, going back 25 years. When the banks in New York wouldn't lend money to Trump, he seemed to get financial assistance from the Russians. And that's probably the limit of his knowledge of Russia. But that gives him a particular viewpoint on Russia. As for Putin, Putin in his first 4 years in office was seeking to modernize Russia, to get its economy moving. He brought in a team of economic reformers. He was seeking to build up Russia's relations with the West. He was very strongly promoting close relations between Russia and NATO, Russia and the European Union. And of course, to the point, he was very helpful to the Americans after 9/11. And they reached the point that he became a full member of the G7. So you had Putin on a particular course that changed very sharply in 2004. That surprised the people closest to Putin. Putin's own prime minister at that period, who got sacked in 2004, Mikhail Kasyanov, said only the other day that they had no idea Putin was likely to make that sort of 180-degree turn in the whole internal and external policy of Russia and start building up their military and being very disruptive towards the West and dismantling a lot of the things he'd achieved in his first term of office. So, yes, I mean, I was there, if you like, in the benign period. Putin always seemed to me to have a split personality. There was a rationalist, pragmatic leader who didn't really understand economic reform, but he'd put the right people in to do it. And then there was, on the other side of his brain, the paranoid ex-KGB officer, rather insecure, big chip on his shoulder about the fact that many of his peers in the Russian elite were much more sophisticated, much more highly educated, and indeed bigger than him. So, there was a complicated personality there. Sharp, but no intellect, no culture, but a pretty sharp, retentive brain, and utterly ruthless.
I mean, I'll return to the really basic question, which when we think about Donald Trump speaking to Vladimir Putin, getting involved in these peace negotiations, most people will just simply ask, and, please do answer it with a very simple answer. What is going on here? That the President of the United States is not getting around the table with the President with President Zelensky, the Ukrainian president. He's not getting round the table with other NATO members, really, particularly. He's getting round the table with Russia. Very simply, what is going on? If we throw this open to the bigger picture, what do you think's going on, Sir Roderic Lyne?
He was getting across the sofa with President Zelensky earlier this week, rather spectacularly. I think what is going on is an old-style New York real estate deal with a bunch of mobsters standing just outside the room. And I think that Trump's style of negotiation very much is about bashing the weaker party. It is very zero-sum, and clearly he's put maximum pressure on Zelensky, on the Ukrainians, to try to get them into a posture to accept a deal. He's trying to flog them, if you like, a dodgy bit of real estate. Or actually he's not, he's trying to flog their bit of real estate to Putin. He clearly hasn't put any pressure on Putin up to this point, or if he has, we have seen zero results, zero indications of this. But we will not get a ceasefire, let alone serious progress towards a lasting peace settlement, unless the Ukrainians have their sovereignty respected and they have proper security. Because otherwise, it's absolutely clear, it's not just Zelensky, it's the Ukrainian population. They will go on resisting being taken over by Mr. Putin. There is no sign yet that Mr. Putin has given up his ambition to crush and take over the Ukrainians and effectively destroy their independence. So if Trump is going to do a deal, that's what he's got to get out of Putin. How's he going to get that out of Putin? I don't know, but he says he's had assurances from Putin that it's all going to happen.
Look,
you can believe that if you want.
Yeah, let's go wilder still, because I keep getting messages about this, and so I'm going to throw it out there to you, Roderic Lyne, whilst you're with us and we're having this really good chat. One of our listeners has said, does Sir Roderic think it's likely that when Trump was in Moscow looking at building hotels at the invitation of criminal officials, that he might have been honey-trapped? It is one of the theories doing the rounds. You might not know for sure, but is there anything to dig into here when we look at the relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin? Is there anything, do you get the inkling, any intuition at all, any intel at all, that there is something more to look at, deeper to look at here?
I think there's got to be something there. I am skeptical of the honey trap. I don't know one way or the other. But I think the point is you don't have to have a honey trap. Indeed, Trump had enough embarrassing episodes back home in the United States, one of which led to him being convicted in a civil case of sexual assault, another of which has led to him being convicted in a criminal case of felony. But if there'd been an embarrassing incident of the kind there's been speculation about involving Russian ladies of a particular kind, I think that might just have been water off the duck's back. So I'm not sure that that's the heart of it, but this is purely speculative. What is not speculative is that over the course of the past 25 years, Trump and his associates, including his sons, because they've talked about it publicly, have had very extensive financial dealings with the Russians, which appear to have involved the Russians lending money you've got to bear in mind that Trump has been an incredibly unsuccessful businessman. He's made money recently on Bitcoin. He's monetized the presidency. He made money through his television program, The Apprentice. He kept bankrupting property deals and running out of money. And he reached a point where very few banks, indeed in the United States, were prepared to lend him money. But he got money out of the Russians. Russians were reported to have rented at very high prices floors of his building in New York. They were reported to have bought, again at a very exaggerated price, a bit of real estate in Florida. There are various other reports that the experts, of whom I'm not one, have documented. And as I say, Trump's own sons have acknowledged at different points publicly that they had a lot of help from the Russians. So, if he takes a benign view of Russia, I think you don't have to look a lot further than that. And after all, what matters to Donald Trump? Basically, this is a man of enormous greed who wants to be very rich. So money matters, maximizing the earning power of the presidency matters to him, and his ego matters. Now, Putin is brilliant at manipulating people. He's flattering Trump's ego. He's saying, you can be the great peacemaker. All you've got to do is basically, not to be too polite about it, screw the Ukrainians on my behalf. And meanwhile, I'm sure there are all sorts of deals that we can do with you or your friends or your family.
Yeah, look, it's been so fascinating to hear from you. Really appreciate you joining us tonight. Sir Roderic Lyne, the former British diplomat, served as the UK ambassador to Russia from 2000 to 2004. Much to think about there, and I thank you for your valid contribution. Super interesting. Thank you, Sir Roderic Lyne. It is Kate Borsett, the evening edition on Times Radio. Coming up, we'll hear from Henry Bonsu, find out what's coming up after 10. Stay with us.
Kathy Newman on Times Radio Drive.